I am going to call the City Council September 15th Joint School Committee meeting of 2020 to order. And in attendance, we have Councilor, in no particular order, Councilor Pett, Councilor McCarthy, Councilor Gilman, Councilor Memhard, Councilor Cox, Councilor Holmgren, Councilor Nolan, Councilor O'Hara, and myself, Councilor LeBlanc.
Okay. And I'm going to call the this meeting of the joint City Council and School Committee, the School Committee to order. I'll remind everybody that the mission of Gloucester Public Schools is for all students to be successful, engaged, lifelong learners. And this meeting is recorded by video and audio in accordance with the state open meeting law, consistent with the governor's orders. Consistent with the governor's orders suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and banning gatherings of more than 25 people. This meeting will be conducted by remote participation. There is no oral communications tonight, so we will not be giving you the information on how to get our attention to speak, because there'll be no public input tonight. So Maria, can we have a roll call of the school committee?
Ms. Watson.
Here.
Ms. Wiesen.
Here.
Kathy Clancy.
Here.
Mr. Pavaza.
Here.
Chairman Pope.
Here.
Ms. Prince.
Here.
And Mayor Taken.
Here.
Thank you. We are going to turn it back to the City Council President, who is going to make a couple of statements from his committee chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start off with our subcommittee chairs, our standing committee chairs. Our first will be Melissa Cox. She's just going to give us a quick update on some of the things that have been done through being budget and finance over the past few months. Councilor Cox.
Greetings all. For the most part, budget and finance job is to accept grants, go through the budget, and we have been doing that very well this year. A lot of grants are coming in. The city side is doing a wonderful job of applying for grants and actually getting them. It's a lot of hard work to apply for those grants. And as you all know, the budget was reviewed remotely this year. It turned into a very successful process, much to the, with much support from the IT department, James Pope in particular. He's no longer with us, but he managed to let us look like champs when we pulled that off this year. So I think that's about all I have. There's not much going on budget and finance, just taking money in left and right through grants.
Thank you, Councilor Cox. Councilor Gilman, our Planning and Development Chair.
Thank you. So our particular standing committee has been somewhat of a challenge, because without being able to do site visits initially during the pandemic and understanding how we would handle any type of public hearings, we were kind of at a standstill early on, but we kept moving forward, having our initial presentations for some very important special council permits, including 171 Atlantic Road, 1 Folly Point Road, 105 Wingasheek, and 99A Essex Ave. And we, so we did the initial presentations, and then on or about the beginning of April, I think it was April 3rd, Governor Baker signed the Chapter 53 of the Acts of 2020, which was House Bill 4598. And what that did was it allowed our permit granting authority person, who is Council President LeBlanc, to schedule or reschedule on one or more occasions the public hearing, provided no such date or deadline is rescheduled for more than 45 days after the termination of the state of emergency. or after a date otherwise prescribed by law, whichever is later. So what that did was it allowed us to put them on hold. And then about a month ago, our committee decided that we felt that we could hold a legitimately safe site visit practicing social distancing. So we've begun to do that, and we've had successful site visits at 1 Folly Point Road, at 171 Atlantic Road. We've had extra sessions so we could have more people, and we've welcomed abutters by a sign-up basis, and we take down all the notes of all the questions that come up. And those are all reviewed in public session when we meet after a site visit. So to my standing committee and to the counselors, it's been kind of a long process, but I feel like we've been very diligent with moving forward and trying to get things moving, but yet being very concerned about the safety of our health and being socially distanced. So it's worked out, and we're all navigating, as the school committee is, on uncharted waters here, and I feel like we've made some good headway. And so let's keep doing that and working together. So thank you for allowing me to quickly present our standing committee.
Thank you, Councilor Gilman. Typically, we don't do this at a joint meeting, but we have several, we have a few new school committee members. We have our new superintendent, Mr. Lummis, and I just wanted them to be updated on some of the positions that we're on, some of the roles that we do as a council. And at Ordinance Administration, we've just reappointed our fire chief, Eric Smith. Ordinance Administration's been pretty slow the past couple of months. We just permitted a scientific research permit for the Mill River. Several beach restriction parking areas over near Plum Cove and throughout the city. We've added a few people to our Human Rights Commission. We opened the firing range in West Gloucester for the police department. We're in the process of reviewing the city charter. We're taking applications from residents. So if anybody knows anybody that would like to join the Charter Commission, please send your resume into the city clerk or the mayor's office. We've had several shelters ordinances amended, and next week we are appointing our Human Resources Director, Holly Dub Willow, to a permanent position. So that's going to be next week. So thank you, Chairman Pope, for allowing us to share some of our information with the school committee. If anybody has any questions, definitely reach out to us and we can guide you through some city council stuff. It'd be our pleasure. I'll hand it over to school committee chairman, John.
Thank you, Councilor LeBlanc, Council President LeBlanc. We are joined tonight by Tom Ellis and Bill Booth, both from CBRE Harry, which is the owner's project management firm for the East Gloucester Veterans School project. And we're also joined by Brad Dorr from Dorr and Whittier, and they will be involved in the presentation that we will be presenting to you tonight. I would just like to take this opportunity to recognize the fact that tomorrow students will be coming back to school. And I would like to thank many people, but most importantly, all of the teachers and the principals and the administration who have been working day and night trying to figure out how to make all of these things work. And my hat's off to them. They've done yeoman's work, and hopefully we'll have a successful opening of school tomorrow. And in the same vein, I'd like to thank Mike Hale and the DPW for the tremendous job they've done in getting our buildings ready for tomorrow's return of students. So that being said, are we ready to move on to the presentation, Steve?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we started this process in 2014. And tonight we are at a pivotal, or not tonight, but within the next few months, we are at a pivotal moment in this process. And what we have before us is a fabulous opportunity for the students of Gloucester, as well as the families and the neighborhood, because this new facility not only will be a 21st century educational facility, it'll also be a community asset. It will have a full-size basketball court inside that can be used by the community year-round. It will have a number of spaces that will make that will be available to the community, as well as parents groups. It'll hopefully will become a center for this, the East Gloucester and Ward 2 community. And that is our hope. And as I said, we're in a critical point. We've started in 2014, and the building committee was formed in 2018, has been working for the past 2 years to get to this point. In August, we were accepted. Our schematic design was accepted by Msba, and we're now going to be going through the process of funding the school so that we can move forward. And that's the critical issue ahead of us, is putting this, the funding of this school before the community. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Brad Dorr, who is going to take us through the design and the sort of how we got there. We'll then get we'll take questions at that point. We'll then get some information from John Dunn to give us an update on how the finances will work. And after that, we're going to get a presentation from Ben Lummis, who will outline all the possibilities of should the debt exclusion fail, and there'll be opportunities for questions at the end of each of these segments. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Brad and to Tom Ellis.
Thank you, Jonathan. Is everybody able to see my screen right now?
Yes.
Okay. So then just here's kind of the talking points that we're going to try and cover. I'm going to take the first two, and then John Dunn will pick up number 3 in terms of financial information, and then Superintendent Lummis will pick up the fourth one in terms of how we move forward. So just quickly, how we got there. When we started out, as Jonathan said, now a couple of years ago, what we really wanted to do was to be able to understand, what are the problems with the schools. And so what we did is we went in there, we did a significant program evaluation to understand exactly how the district wanted to teach, these age children. We also looked at all of the facilities to really understand what the condition of those were, what the technology situation was. And when the district initially put in its statement of interest with the MSBA, it was, by the way the MSBA program is set up, only allowed for one school to be submitted. Out of that MSBA process, they actually came back and suggested that they take a look at 2 schools. So both the East Gloucester and Veterans schools were considered. So we looked at a number of different options there, and then ultimately the third step is to go ahead and pick a preferred option and move forward with that in the schematic design process. So this is just a quick graphic to show you, how you currently stack up with respect to what your program suggests, what your building size is, and as you can see here, you're significantly overcrowded in both schools. This is a couple of images looking at both the East Gloucester as well as the Veterans School. You can see, kind of classrooms somewhat outdated. These buildings are 60, 70 years old. They're crowded, in terms of storage. looking at how the safety works on the school, people getting in and out of the buildings. You know, here's an example of your gymnasium, which obviously is very different from what you would see in a new facility. As hard as Mike Hale and Joe Lucido are working, trying to keep up, these buildings are old, right? They're tired. That's a yeoman's job to keep up with all of these things. Here is an example of the basement at East Gloucester School, where actually we have a stream that runs underneath that as well. Some outdated plumbing fixtures, spaces used for special education that were not intended for special education. You can see here, you know, some of the electrical equipment. Again, you know, these buildings have been around for 70 years and have done the district and the city well, but eventually all of these things start to get tired. When we looked at options, we had a full cadre of options that we looked at. We looked at renovation, which is really more or less just bringing the building into code at the East Gloucester School. Again, when we're looking at just the East Gloucester School project, you know, that was for that population of students only. So it would be only at that site. That's why we looked at renovation only there. Addition renovation as well, because as you saw, it was overcrowded. So we would need to add to that if we were to look at a renovation type option, as well as new construction. At veterans, because it would be a combined school population, you wouldn't be able to do just a renovation there. So we looked at addition and renovation, new construction. We also looked at some other sites as well. And when we looked at the design enrollments, you know, it's either 230 for a single school or 440 for a combined school. And all of this follows the prescribed MSBA process for going through the feasibility and schematic design phase. So this is an overview of the site plan at the veteran site, which is where the preferred option landed. As you can see, we're able to look at the combined school, which does meet the educational program, locate that on the site. You saw some imagery of that before. The nice thing here from a siting perspective is that we're able to have a separate bus drop-off, separate from the vehicular drop-off where parents will be going. So buses will be able to come in, and those two populations are separate, which is a much safer situation than currently exists today. We're also able to go and have play space in the back. We also have play space in the front. This would be gated off when the buses aren't there to allow for additional play space, a dedicated kindergarten area. And then when we look at you know, pickup in the afternoon where we have more cars, what we've done is we've gone and we've extended that queue line to be able to go all the way around the building where this red gate is. Okay, that would be opened up in the afternoon after the students are cleared out of the playground area, and then cars would be able to queue up all the way around here and back down. So that allows us to get a significant number of cars. I forget what the exact number is, but it's north of 100 cars off of these roads. We've done multiple traffic analyses. I think we actually showed some of that to both the school committee and the council previously. So we are confident that we're able to meet all of these items fully on this particular site. These are just a couple of quick looks at some of the spaces. The administration space, which is currently undersized in both school facilities, is able now to take care of all the administrative needs as well as guidance. Gym and performance, as Jonathan mentioned, we do have a full-size gymnasium here. One of the things that we learned from the West Parish project was how important performance space is, and the actual desire to have a more significant performance space, more of a stage. They aren't allowed from a programmatic perspective in the MSBA program, but what we were able to do is work this space into the gymnasium and have the stage off at the gymnasium, so it's a gymatorium, so to speak. Classrooms now are all properly sized and consistent with the MSBA guidelines and standards, and cafeteria will be able to take care of the entire student population in 2 terms. Again, this is just a couple more images of the building. You are looking, forward at the front entrance, bus drop off. Another different angle, a little bit further up Webster Street. This is a pretty good look at the playground area in behind. The notion here is to be able to have poured rubberized surface here on this side where the playground is, and this would be, because of the amount of use it's going to be getting, is to have this as an artificial turf field, because grass wouldn't be able to be supported there with the amount of traffic that's going to be on that. And then you can see here, this is that road I was speaking to earlier, which would be queue space. But when the playground's active, there's a gate, as you can see right over here. Just another different look at it. And that's what we have for my presentation, where we've kind of broken it into 3 sections. And so if there are any questions related to this portion of the presentation, we're happy to try and field those for you now. And if there are none, we can move this on to the next point, and I'll turn this over to John Dunn and Tom Ellis.
All right. Jonathan, you want to allow the council to ask a couple of quick questions? I see Barry's got his hand up.
Yes, go ahead.
Councilor Pat?
Yes, one of the questions I had submitted says, is the design of the new school complete at this point, and can there still be some refinements? And my point is that I think publicly funded schools should be designed for functionality and cost, not aesthetics specifically. And I think that, like, the entrance at West Parish School, to me, was overboard and didn't meet the goals of, functionality and cost. And even though I don't see in, the presentations we've had here any similar issues for this school, I'm just wondering if the design at this point is finalized, or if there is, question for people to look at things and make some refinements and maybe make some costs, and even if there are any changes that might come about due to COVID concerns, maybe with the HVAC systems or anything like that.
Sure. So what I can tell you is we're at probably one of the most significant milestones in the MSBA process right now, where we've just completed the schematic design. And the schematic design portion allows us to go and put together, with a fairly significant amount of detail, what the project's about, what the size of the project is, what the basic specifications of the project are. But I don't want to oversell that the design is completed. And if architectural parlance would tell you that this is, typically around the 20% design complete mode. But what it does do is it does allow the project cost to be estimated. And we've actually had 2 estimators. We actually have a construction manager that's been brought on board. So the construction manager and an independent estimator both put together estimates, and then those estimates were reconciled. And then that reconciled estimate, along with the other project costs, is submitted to MSBA. So while there is an opportunity as we go through the design process to make some changes, there are certain rules that we need to follow with respect to MSBA, space being one of them, the size of the building being one of them, the adjacencies of the spaces. And as MSBA will tell you, is that the amount of their grant is now fixed in stone. No matter what happens, it will never go up. So those are kind of the guardrails, right, that we have right now. There are always opportunities to take a look at things, but again, I don't want to oversell that. There's like significant changes that would be made in terms of the overall program of the building.
Right. Yep, that answers the question. And again, I just wanted to make sure that there are a number, that people understand there's a number of people that think that, functionality is 99% versus, say, aesthetic view being a very small percentage. And where we can save money over the years, it makes a big difference. Obviously, this design, as it's been presented so far schematically, looks wonderful. I did make the comment, and I still have that feeling about the West Parish look, that there was, to me, in other words, there could have been a cost saving if they had looked at it at least in the entranceway, if not in some other ways. But thank you for the, detailing the answers to the question.
You're welcome.
All righty, Barry, thank you. Councilor Cox?
I just have a question on the design. When you showed the playground area in the front and in the back area, neither of them had fences around them. So when you do open it up for cars to go through, if there are kids playing after school, just for a safety aspect?
Yeah, yeah, this isn't 100%. It's hard to kind of see there, but we do have some fences that would be
Not
along.
there, on the
Pardon?
internal. If people were playing after school and the cars were queuing up, that internal part of it.
Oh, so actually the approach here is to have this. I have a better thing. I can go back to the site plan here for you. Is to be able to essentially lock this area down so that there would be no students out in this back area when those cars would be queuing up, right? That would be at the end of the day. So the school would be bringing all of those students back into the building. And then at that point in time, right, the cars would be able to go and queue up. And they would actually queue all the way around the circle back around towards this front door right here. And so the idea is that there wouldn't be any students back here when the cars are back there. And then we would have, a fenced in area around this dedicated kindergarten area, as I said, as well as the perimeter of the site.
Okay, I highly disagree with the fact that you're not going to have any kids back there playing on playground equipment during at the end of the day at school. I mean, it's supposed to be a public playground in the first place. So after school's out, if a neighbor wants to come over, I just think there should be a fence surrounding that internal aspect of the playground.
That's an example of something we certainly can look at.
And also the gates can be closed again once the pickup of students is complete. There's no need for cars to be going down there. So those gates can be closed, and rather than restrict the kids, we restrict the cars.
So how are you going to get in the playground area if it's a Saturday, if the gates are up?
You walk around them. You park in the parking lot and walk around them.
Okay.
They're to prevent cars, not people.
Right. The idea of this area back here is really just set up for queuing.
So there's not an external fence around the playground area like you just pointed out?
No, there will be here, all the way around here, right? There's another gate here because this is a fire access, right? But we don't intend for cars to be going back and forth here during the day, right? And there would be another gate here, right, to go once the buses have dropped everybody off. And then if you're here on a weekend, the idea is that there would probably be some bollards that would be in here. So to prevent cars from, going up over the lawn. And so people would be able to park here, right, and walk through and access this play area.
All right, you're not getting at all what I'm asking, so that's fine. Moving on.
All right, is there any other councilor questions? All right, seeing none, I'll hand it back over to Chairman Pope.
Okay, are there any school committee questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the presentation from John Dunn, Treasurer.
All right, can everybody hear me? Give me a thumbs, thank you. All right. Just kind of a quick overview on the taxation and the levy limit. As many of you know, but maybe not all, the levy limit each year for taxation, property taxation, can increase by 2.5% from year to year, plus what they call new growth, which is additional valuation that's derived from building permits. So that's where the basic levy limit goes from year to year. In terms of Gloucester, we have a number of things that add to the levy limit. And actually, this is what we're talking about in terms of the vote that's going to be taken in November. So there's a number of different ways to have an override. So an override is generally going to be a vote. There's going to be perhaps a general override, which would be add $1 million to your levy limit from this day forward. So that's a general override, can be used for whatever purposes are necessary. There's a debt exclusion override, which is kind of what we're talking about for funding the new elementary school. And that would be just adding the debt service associated with the project to the levy limit each year. When the debt service goes away or it shrinks, then that goes away and it's not a permanent override. A third override, which is not as widely used, would be an override for a specific purpose to purchase a $1 million fire truck, for example. There's also something that's a little bit out of the ordinary, but that has happened up here in Gloucester over the past 10 years. And that is a water and sewer enterprise fund debt shifts. And that happens when the mayor proposes and the city council approves a shift of debt out of the water or sewer enterprise funds that would otherwise be paid in the rates to then be applied to the tax rate and be paid out of the general fund. About 11 years ago, 10, 11 years ago, there was a shift approved for the CSO project work. 5 years ago, there was another vote to approve the shift of the specific water debt that was outstanding at that time. So what you're looking at here in this presentation is the current debt that has been shifted out of the water fund and the sewer fund and then added to the tax levy. So as you can see, in 2020, that was $5,076,000, and it begins to decrease over time. So as we looked at how to afford the new school in terms of a debt shift, we're looking at this as kind of the base. So this is already built into the increase in the tax levy. So what happens over time? Over time, this debt runs off and we create some additional capacity that will offset the cost of adding the specific debt for the consolidated elementary school. So the total debt shift, as you can see in that far right-hand column, it decreases over time. Brad, next slide, please. Okay, so this is just a presentation of the changes in that debt that then gets added to the tax levy. So as you can see, very modest change from 2020 to 2021. 2021 is the year that we're in, and then it begins to accelerate. So 84,000, then 457,000, then 587, and 668, And then in 2027, and this is from the base year of 2020, in 2027, we have $1.3 million being retired from what the debt service are already committed to, and that can be potentially absorbed for new debt service. Next slide, please, Brad. This gets a little bit more complicated, but the essence here is that I'm showing again the fiscal years. The second column in from the left is that shift change that we saw in the previous presentation. And then we're beginning to layer in what we might expect as debt service. So issue number 1, as you can see in the note underneath, is $24 million of level debt issued in late 2021 at 2.5% for 25 years. Issue 2 is $10.5 million of level debt issued in late 2023 at 4.5% for 25 years. And then issue 3 is 10.5 issued in late 2025 at 5.5% for 25 years. Now, I will make a comment that I am just projecting out what these what the interest rates are going to be. I have no idea. If I knew for sure what interest rates are going to be, I'd actually be reporting this from a beach in the Bahamas with a drink. But you know, at this point, I will make another comment that last week we issued 20-year debt for close to $10 million, and that issuance rate was netted out at 1.4%. This is an incredible time to be issuing debt. I never would have expected to see something like 1.4%, but that's in fact what the city got. So when I first started playing with these scenarios, I was much more conservative in terms of issuing the amount of debt that I issued early on. You know, at this point, if rates continue where they are and the override passes and we do go forward, I might suggest that the city be more aggressive in the amount of debt it takes down in January if we're able to lock in something that's in the 2.5% range. And what I'm seeing now is that it will be closer to 2 than 2.5%. So this is an incredibly different time than most of us have ever been used to, but it perhaps gives us an opportunity. So again, this is just in terms of the 3 issuances here. This is just one of the ways to do it. It's not something we're committed to, but the idea here is that we're going to be issuing debt. We're going to be adding it to the changes from the previous chart, and basically trying to moderate what the impact is going to be on the tax rate. And that impact comes out in the far right-hand column. And the idea here when we started was that we wanted to make sure, or as best we can manage, to make sure that the impact is going to be basically 20 cents on $100,000 of value. And essentially what that translates into is that if you have a home or any property that is assessed at $500,000, then the total increase in taxation as we layer this debt in would be $100 a year. Now, we do have some other ways to manage around this, and that is the 4th column from the right. And I've labeled that as stabilization support. So we have a fairly strong general stabilization fund, which we could use to moderate the tax impact as we move forward. I'm not necessarily committed to that, and certainly I'm not going to be around through the whole whole history of this. So the future mayors, the future council, and whoever is in the position on the CFO side is going to have to make recommendations. But this, again, is one way to moderate that far right-hand column to keep it down somewhere in the nature of, 20 cents per 100,000 of value. So, Brad, next slide. So this slide translates that far right-hand column on the previous page across various levels of valuation for residential homeowners. So we can kind of ignore the 2021 because that's the year we're in. And really we've seen some roll off from 2020 to 2021. So what really we're looking at is the 2022 columns and down, or rows and down. And again, what you see going across the page is estimated impact of increased taxes on values of 300,000, 400,000, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and $1 million. I wasn't going to go past $1 million just because there'll be too many numbers out there, but it's fairly easy to do specific math if you want to do that by using that second column from the left and multiplying that by the value of your house divided by 100,000. So that is basically where we are. I was kind of surprised that we were able to keep it within these ranges. Again, there's no guarantee that the type of thing I proposed here that you're looking at is something that we can actually do. But in talking to my outside advisors, they think that it's a reasonable approach, and that in fact, given where rates are right now, assuming things don't go completely haywire as a result of whatever the election results are in November on the national level, that these rates should be reasonably available to us over the next 2 to 3 years. So that's my presentation. I hope I've kind of given you enough background. Happy to consider any questions that anybody may have.
All right.
I have a question.
Councilor Nolan.
John, you had said 20 cents per 100,000. I believe it's $20. Was that right or wrong?
Oh, it's 20 cents on valuation. So
20 cents on valuation on 100,000?
well, excuse me, you're right. It's $20 on valuation of 100. So so if it's 500,000 in valuation, then it is $100. And excuse me for making that mistake. We generally talk about it in terms of valuation per, or cost per $1,000 of valuation. I just had to translate that.
Not a problem. Thank you very much for clearing that up.
I have a question.
Councilor Holmgren.
Thank you. Thank you, John. I had emailed you regarding a question that a taxpayer had raised with respect to being able to being unable to absorb the additional burden that this might place on her. And you were incredibly helpful in answering my question. So I just wanted to make sure that attendees and anybody who listens to this meeting understands that if people don't feel that they can afford to take on this addition to their taxes, that they should feel free to contact the assessor's office to see if they could qualify for some sort of exemption. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct, Counselor. The exemptions are basically laid out by state law. They are very specific. And, unfortunately, as I mentioned, unaffordability there's no exemption or abatement that's legally available just because you can't afford it. You know,
Okay.
I'm sorry to say that, but that's just life.
That's the state law. Okay. Thank you very much. So anybody who's concerned should contact the assessor's office and see if they would qualify. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Councilor McCarthy.
Yes, John, when the people vote on this, this is going to be a projected cost, is that correct? And if we have cost overruns or it comes in under cost, that would directly affect what they're going to be paying, is that correct?
Kind of a two-part answer to that, Counselor. So the way the question is worded by law, by the requirements of the state, by the requirements of MSBA. It's a very simple question. You're either going to vote for an override to pay for the school, or you're not. So we don't put numbers out there, and nothing really. It's basically a two-sentence question, and that's how we have to put it out there. More specifically, is that if the override is approved, and what we're showing you is what the estimated total project cost is at this point in time, it's 66.7 million. Now remember, that is only for the construction of the new combined elementary school. There are some other ancillary costs on the side, which is another loan order that is going to be before you. Was already introduced in the amount of 4.2 million to cover some of the ancillary costs. But specifically, we have an agreement with MSBA that this project is going to cost no more than $66.7 million, that the maximum MSBA grant is going to be 26.9. If the override passes, we're going to come back to the council for a loan order in the amount of $66.7 million.
All right, anything else, John?
Just to be clear, John, if it went over the 66.7 million, the assessment would go up to the people. Is that correct?
If it were to go over 66.7 million, that would have to be identified in terms of something that happened within the course of the 2-year construction of the project, or design and construction, 2+ year design and construction of the project. And we would in fact have to come back to the council to increase that loan order above 66.7 million. So, from the administration's point of view, from the design team's point of view, from the OPM's point of view, we would have to have, a very good reason to come back to the council, very strong recommendation as to why it should be more than 66.7 million.
I guess I would also just add to that, John, right, that as part of that total project cost, which includes both the total construction cost as well as other soft project costs, right, there's about $5+ million, right, that's allocated towards contingency to cover, those types of things that always happen in due course with construction. So if we have change orders for unsuitable soils, if the designers, make a mistake, if there's latent conditions, as well as other changes that the owner may decide to make along the way, right? We have a significant amount of contingency built into that $66.7 million.
Yes,
Okay,
that's a very good point. And to the group, yes, we do have room here for unanticipated costs. We hope we don't have to use them, but they are built in.
Does that answer your question, John, Counselor?
Yes, thank you.
All righty. Is there any other counselor questions before we turn it over to the school committee? All right, seeing none, I will hand it over to Chairman Pope.
Joel has a question.
I think Val had her hand up. I don't know
Val had
if
her
you could
hand
see her. I don't know. That's okay.
I did.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Before
John, mind?
We'll wait for Joe.
Okay, Councilor Gilman?
Thank you. So I think I'm going to wait for the other question that I have that I gave you in advance till after all the presentations, if that's okay with everyone.
Sure.
Okay, so I have a more specific question to this slide. So why is it necessary that we have to give the total project cost and then the grant when the actual cost to the taxpayers is about 40 million? So in other words, so this is looking at 66.7, and you look at that and you say, okay, the school's worth 66.7, and we're really not giving enough, in my opinion, substance to the fact that we're getting a grant from the state in a very competitive group of grants for 27 million. So why is it that we have to present it this way, John? I'm sure there's a reason, because it doesn't completely give the credibility to the amount of money that we're getting to subsidize the school, I guess is my point. So I'm just interested in why that has to be presented like this.
All right, so the why is that we need an appropriation from the council in order to spend the full cost of the project. So we technically could do this a different way.
Mm-hmm.
We could present to the council a loan order for 45 million, and then also have you accept a grant from the MSBA for 25 million. But that gets messy. And also the MSBA is not going to give us a specific amount. They're going to tell us the maximum amount they're going to give us, but they're only going to give us an amount after they have audited all of our eligible expenses. So if you remember, when we present loan orders to the council, let's take, for example, the harbor master office. The loan order that was out there that was approved was 2.5 million. We spent 2.5 million, but embedded within the loan order was language that allowed for the mayor and the treasurer to accept any grants or donations that were available to be used for the construction of the harbor master's office. And in fact, even though the project was 2.5 million, we're going to get 1.2 million from the Seaport Economic Council. So the debt we're going to issue is only 1.3. But we need a full appropriation in order to spend the money. So that's why we do it this way. So what we need is, and this is the same way as we did it with West Parish, we present the full cost of the project, of the construction project, to the council for approval in a loan order, and then we accept the MSBA grants as they come in after they each one of the submissions is audited.
Okay, thank you.
All set, Councilor?
Yeah, that answers my question. Thank you.
All righty, are there any more Councilor questions?
Melissa Cox has her hand up.
Okay, it's hard for me to see everybody on my screen. Councilor Cox?
John, when you're talking about total project cost, is that going to include relocating the softball field?
No. So that is being handled outside of our agreement on the project with the MSBA. So as I mentioned, there are some ancillary costs that are never going to be reimbursed by MSBA. Those would include relocation of the softball field, swing space, and then also ultimately the demolition of East Gloucester and the renovation of that site into passive recreation space. So the decision was made a fair time ago that rather than include that in the MSBA total project, we would treat those differently. So that is the $4.2 million loan order that is coming forward, was presented to the council last week. Will be coming to BNF for consideration, and that is going to cover those ancillary costs because those are not going to be reimbursed in any manner by MSBA. And rather than delay final MSBA audit because the demolition of East Gloucester and the renovation of that site are at the very tail end of this project, we decided to treat them separately.
Okay, I'm sorry, did you just say that those are going to be at the tail end of the project?
Well, certainly we can't start demolishing East Gloucester until the students and the staff are out of there. So, and they're not going to be out of that school until they know that their next transition is going to be into the new school. So
Right. But the other two pieces of that 4.2, the relocation and the swing space, are going to be
yes,
prior to.
they're going to be spent prior. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
All righty, Council, thank you. Any other councilor questions? All righty, seeing none, Chairman Pope.
Okay. Joel Favaza.
Thank you. Just a fair warning, I had some connectivity problems, so if I ask a question that's been answered, everyone just feel free to yell at me. That being said, two questions I have. The first being, based on pushback or feedback, however you want to frame it, from people in the city when I discuss this issue, is, you know, this $100 a year for $500,000 home sounds great. And then they go, yeah, what about Beeman? And so around 2027, which is when your, you know, with the debt service kind of really came alive and had some capacity if you just start getting heavy with it, that would be, if we're lucky, around the same time, you know, the Beeman Plum Cove project. And just doing the math, West Parish to this, to that, you know, call it 90, call it 54 million on our side. Would it be reasonable to infer that it would be a similar amount per thousand? If it went back out for another override, it'd be a similar kind of situation. So we'd have $100 a year for a $500,000 home for E.G. Vets, and then only another 110 a year for Beeman Plum Cove? Or would there be some, you know, exponential reason why it would be much more expensive if another school piled on top, you know, 7 years from now?
I guess that's to me. So I don't have a crystal ball, but I kind of will say that you know, what we've got here with a school project is essentially a 10-year timeline. As Jonathan Pope pointed out, we started, you know, talking about this particular project in 2014. You know, by the time we have everybody move in and we've issued the debt, we've gone through the audit, we're in 2024, 10-year timeline. If the MSBA is going to deal with the city of Gloucester on essentially a 10-year timeline, so we're going to do it, you know, this similar type project every 10 years, that puts us for, presumably if the city decides to go that way, a new consolidated elementary school for the two others in the mid-2030s. What happens in the mid-2030s within the city, and I actually had a spreadsheet that I didn't include here, but the city's unpaid pension liability from past employees runs off in 2034 in its last year. So as projected now in 2034, the pension liability to PARAC is $21 million. In 2035, it goes to $3.5 million. So even though a good portion of that, the majority of that is going to have to be aimed at another unfunded liability, which is other employment benefits, other post-employment benefits. I'm thinking that there could be $3 or $4 million a year in debt service available for a new school. I'm not going to be around for that. I don't know how many of you are going to be around in the mid-2030s still doing these jobs, but something to think about.
Okay, and then my second question for Mr. Dunn. Prior to the pandemic hitting, I was speaking to a former staff member of the administration talking about, if this vote fails and, there isn't this additional levy coming in, is this project dead in the water, or is there ways to shift around within the general fund to keep this thing alive until this can go back out, for a vote again? And the answer was that it would hurt, but it would not be impossible to begin servicing this debt within the general fund should the vote fail, but the administration and other elected officials still wishing for the project to go forward. Is that correct in a post-pandemic world?
Yes. So, if this project can't be done with an override, then I think it's essentially dead in the water, unless the community wants to come forward and say how we're going to cut $1.3 million out of the current budgets. So if the schools want to take, you want to cut $1.3 million out of your budget, then we can do it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Melissa Prince has a question.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming together tonight for this important meeting. So I just want to make a comment and then a question to Mr. Dunn. My comment was, I just wanted to remind everyone that we have built 2 schools. We built Essex Tech and we built the West Parish School, and both projects were on time and under budget. So fingers crossed that this one does the same. And my comment is, my question to James is, when you hear people in the community talking about this project, almost hand in hand goes the conversation with the sewer project, because many taxpayers are concerned that we're not going to be able to afford both. So I don't know if I missed it in your presentation, but was there any type of announcement to the public of what the sewer project is going to cost going forward as this project goes forward? Because I think that's part of our a barrier to get people to agree to this project, knowing that taxes could go up significantly with both projects at the same time. So I guess my question is there information about the sewer project out there, like we're doing with the building project?
I guess if that's aimed at me, I'm going to say we're early on in the sewer project. We don't have a scope of work. We don't have a timeline. We don't have any idea of what support might be available from state or federal grants. So I can't even take a guess at what that would be. And at this point, it's still very early on in this project. If you want to think about it from the point of view of the secondary sewer treatment project is in the same place as this project was in 2014.
So it's safe to say that this large number that's floating around in the community of what the sewer project is going to cost is just a guesstimate, because we don't know actual costs and grants and other things that may impact the cost and drive down what people think is extremely high?
Well, again, I don't know how to respond to that. You know, we don't know the information.
Okay.
And yes, and we can't, you know, if people are going to speculate on numbers that are out there, then they're going to speculate. But at this point, we don't have enough information to even propose what might happen and who's going to pay for it.
Thank you. So great to hear this news about the school costing what it may cost. So I was just hoping that that would create a little relief to taxpayers, knowing the sewer project, even though it's a large number like this is, may not be as much either. So thank you for the attempt to answer that question. I appreciate it.
Okay, Kathy Clancy.
Good evening, everyone. So my question, I have just two questions, John. One is, I think it might be helpful to educate us on why we have such a favorable interest rate, which I think I have some idea, but I think it would be helpful to understand why Gloucester is able to borrow at such a low percent. And my other question is, can you go over kind of typical timing and cycle on MSBA reimbursement? Because we know the total project is, you know, approximately 66 million, but we would never really be out there borrowing 66 million. So I was just hoping you might go through how quickly the MSBA and how that timing works on their reimbursement.
All right. Response to your first question is it's just where the market is. I mean, it does matter where a community's credit rating is. So it's you know, what they receive in terms of support from either Moody's or S&P or one of the other rating agencies. But to be truthful, it's more based on where the markets are. And right now, the markets are incredible. So we issue double tax-free for the most part, not everything we do, but for most of what we do, which means that we issue debt that is exempt from both federal and in Massachusetts state taxation. So that adjusts the rates. But again, even if you go out and look around, if you really look around hard, you can find 15-year mortgage money at 2.5%. So it's just where the market is. I was very surprised last week that we received actually just one bid on our debt because we generally get 5 or 6 bids. We're well known in the market. We issue on a regular basis. We have a steady rating from S&P, and we get good response. So I was a bit surprised at the one bid. However, the way we put this out there is we put it out on a bid basis. We don't negotiate the rate. So that one particular bidder, who has many times won in the past, didn't know they were going to be the only bidder. What is going on right now is that the rates are so low that people are flooding the market. So a community on the South Shore that I've talked to, they went out for, they issued some debt in July. They received their, you know, I think it was $14, $15 million of debt in July. They just issued again another $30 million last week. So it's just where the markets are. We don't have any control over that. The markets are much more important than the credit ratings. Credit ratings are great, but it's where the markets are. Don't know how long that's going to keep up, but you know, if this override passes, then we may in fact want to lock down a big chunk of money at these rates. In terms of the timing of the cash flow, MSBA reimburses grants on a fairly regular basis. So we would submit to them information monthly on the invoices that we pay. Again, presuming that it's, we're not sending them information on $10,000 worth of invoices. So, in terms of this project, we'll probably be sending them, invoices from the design firm, the OPM, and the contractor monthly, or at worst every other month, and they turn around those pretty quickly. So no, we're not going to be borrowing 67.7 million. We will probably at some point be borrowing more than what we would ultimately be issuing permanent bond debt for, but it's not going to be 67.7 million.
Okay, Kathy? Okay. Laura?
So my question, thank you, Jonathan. My question follows up on this issue of the interest rates. I'm just wondering, John, if the fact that we're at these historically low interest rates could in fact serve to make, and the possibility of getting debt at these rates could actually lower the cost to taxpayers in the city if we're able to borrow this money at a lower rate than we expect to.
Yeah, the simple answer is yes. So what I've laid out here is just one of 21 different approaches to this. There may be a couple of different ways to do this. There may be a couple of different ways to kind of moderate and get below that kind of 1850 that I've established here. So yes, it's not going to be, it's not going to change 1850 into 10, but it could change 1850 into a consistent 15. So, we're still going to be borrowing 45 million bucks, and we still have to pay it back. And there's going to be some interest on it. The interest at this point is, as I said, incredibly low in my experience. I can't believe it, but I will take it. And again, if this project goes forward, and we have the opportunity to lock down a big chunk of money at these interest rates, then I'm going to highly recommend that the community does that.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anybody else on the school committee who hasn't asked a question yet that would like to? Okay, then I'm going to let Melissa ask one more question, and then we'll go back
Thanks,
to
Greg.
the council.
So very quickly, Mr. Dunn, MSBA is reimbursing us in this project, even though the world is in a financial grip with COVID. Knowing that you speak to state agencies and things like that, have you heard that MSBA likely won't be approving projects the way they have or at the same percentage rate that they've been paying because of COVID? I mean, I know at my job, I'm going to be asked to take a furlough soon because the state needs money. So I'm just wondering if you've officially heard or unofficially have heard from anyone about MSBA not funding projects going forward. Therefore, this type of money won't be available probably not for a long time or anytime soon. So I'm just wondering if you've heard anything like that from other agencies or other cities or government departments.
No, nobody's checking in with me to tell me what's going on. But as we know, the MSBA receives their funding through the state sales tax. So if people are buying lesser amounts of things that are taxable at the state level, then it's going to restrict their revenue flows in the future. I feel relatively sure that that the folks at MSBA are well aware of what's going on. They are watching their revenue flows and not overcommitting to something. But The MSBA has, and this is not criticism, this is just reality. The MSBA has the ability to not accept as many new projects as in the future as it goes forward, or to adjust the formulas that they use for eligible reimbursement. And that could be, as simple as freezing the per square footage costs that they will reimburse. They do that for a couple of years. They get outside of the 4 to 5% construction inflation that maybe allows them to fund another project or two that they might not otherwise be able to fund for a community. My general sense of what the MSBA wants to do is they want to be fair to all the communities across the state, and they will try and figure out a way to do that.
So it sounds to me like with the low interest rates and the commitment that we have from MSBA, we're in a pretty good place considering all that's going wrong in the world. So thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Okay, Steve, that's it for committee questions. I'm going to hand it back to you if you want to recognize Val. She has her hand up.
Councilor Gilman?
Thank you, Counselor. I have a question for John Dunn, and I just wanted to mention something to the new school committee members and also to our new superintendent, Ben Lummis. So my question or my comment is that with this administration about when they took over, they started a new free cash policy where 40% of the annual free cash was put into a just general fund, affiliated stabilization funds regarding capital. So, so my question to John is, back in February, when people started asking me about the sewer debt and all these new expenses, I reached out to you to ask you how much we had. And on February 10th of this year, you said, Val, we have 4 general fund affiliated stabilization funds. One was 7500 general stabilization with a balance of 6,498,679. The second one was code number 7600, which is a capital project stabilization with a balance of 2,276,612. The third was number 7601 line item called Energy Management Stabilization with a balance of 95,978. And the fourth was 7700 Building Maintenance Stabilization with a balance of 2,025,281. So my question kind of piggybacks on the question that Melissa Texera asked about the additional debt for upgrading our sewer and other major expenses that we see that some taxpayers are worried about, as we all are. But my question is, how many is it ever possible that we would make a decision that some of this funding that we have in this reserve that we've created for good things, that this might be an opportunity to let the public know that, we will be offsetting, or we could reserve some of this money to offset those additional expenses that residents are duly concerned about, because we've been collecting this money that we've never had before because we're doing good annual management with free cash and not using free cash for one-time expenses anymore. And we're collecting it for good and important reasons. So that's my question, John. Are we still about 10 or 11 million in these different categories? And is it something that a project like these additional expenses could tap into?
Oh, okay. All right. So the stabilization funds are set up, and basically they are in many ways like free cash. However, they are separate funds. They are put off to the side. In our case, we have them available for specific purposes, although there's no reason why, with a vote of the council, they could not be moved from one purpose to another. On the other hand, they are specific purpose funds. They can't be used without the council's approval. So any reason that the city would want to use these funds for in any one of the stabilization funds, it will require a supermajority vote of the council to do it. So you all would be well aware of it, and it would require to go through the mayor's report to the council, referred to BNF, come back to the council for a full vote. So, none of this can be used except for a specific purpose as approved by a supermajority vote of the council. Having said that, we generally are trying to maintain reserves at about 15% of the total annual general fund budget, including the schools. So, we'll call that 105 million. We want to maintain 15 million in reserves between the stabilization funds and free cash. So that's why we do that. Having said that, free cash is there for, and stabilization funds are there for emergencies. And I'm going to say that right now, given where we are, given where the pandemic is, we could be facing an emergency. So we have funding from the federal government through the state. We have funding, in a variety of circumstances for that. But it's very likely that the cost to the city to deal with this issue is going to exceed what we have available for outside support. So it is very likely that we could be dipping into either free cash or a stabilization fund before we get to the end of this. So our funding at the state and federal level goes through December 31st in terms of the grants. So what happens to the expenses that are post December 31st? We're going to have to find a way to pay for. I hope I've kind of answered the question, but yes, it is. They are funds that are available just like your savings account at home, and you may need them because you need a new roof, and you need a roof tomorrow because it's leaking today. So even though they're there and they're available, and you can certainly update anybody on what those amounts are, we could need them.
Thank you, John.
Councilor Pat?
Yes, thank you, Council President. This is just a question to the school committee. If the debt exclusion vote does pass and we move forward, there's a lot of pieces to this, timing-wise. In other words, construction of the new athletic facility, moving into the the swing space, the construction, whatever. And there can be delays, et cetera, in any parts of this. And one of my concerns, and I'm hoping we could just get a commitment from the school committee, is that the Cape Ann Women's Softball League does use Mados Field, and never mind all the work they did in trying to fix the field up. But with the timing of all of these projects going together, I'm just concerned that I don't want them to lose their play field or a play field. And having made a couple of inquiries and questions, my understanding is that it would be possible to use the field at Gloucester High School. And my understanding also is the schedule of the school, if sports are going on, would be that the softball season would be ending probably end of April, and it'd be early May is when the softball league starts. And I'm wondering if we could get a commitment from the school committee, if all the pieces of the puzzle don't all go that well, that we'd be able to get a commitment from the school committee to be able to work with the Cape Ann Women's Softball League to maybe to use the field at the high school.
Thank you. We have already discussed that possibility, and like I say, we offered that early on, and I believe,
Okay.
and I've talked to the athletic director, and if there's a gap between the new field and the decommissioning of the Matos field, then that certainly would be available. Now,
Okay, wonderful, thank you.
and we would work with the athletic director to work out the scheduling.
Thank you very much, Chairman Pope.
Thank you, Barry. Councilor O'Hara.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone tonight for participating. I want to thank the school committee and everyone who's been a part of the school reconstruction. Obviously, everyone knows where we have a terrible situation that the whole world has been facing, and it's whittled down to us here in Gloucester. And I'm having great pains as far as answering questions of my constituents, many of them who are unemployed, how we can justify a construction of a new school. The state being $1 billion in the whole pertaining to our welfare program. Unemployment is at record levels. The MBTA has projected that they're $500 million in the hole, and it goes on and on. Tolls are down. No one's driving. The cars are coming back. I drive, and I can attest to that. But the roads have been barren. I'm just having great pains as far as how do we justify constructing a new, basically an $80 million school when we can't. That's a, if you will, a luxury item. We have existing schools. Yes, maybe they're not in the best of condition right now. Shame on us for that being in that light, but we're looking at a secondary sewer treatment plant, which is being mandated.
Counselor, I'd like to call a point of order.
Oh, okay, Councilor Gilman.
Thank you. I believe that we, this is not what's on the agenda for tonight. Our opinions of what the next step is will occur when we go to the ballot box on November 3rd. And
Councilor Gilman, I haven't asked my question yet. I'm getting to my question.
Okay, Counselor, I just wanted to state my opinion. I just felt that,
Sure.
you know, we all have opinions on what it is we want to do, and I felt that
we've gone over a lot of numbers. John Dunn, who is tremendous at his profession, has done great things for the city, and I respect his abilities and what he has done. But he's enlightened us on numbers. You know, this is a joint meeting, which I called prior to the new council being seated. We're finally together. We have to talk. We have to look at reality.
May I please call a point of order, Mr.
Yes.
President?
Yes.
I'd like Councilor O'Hara to please get to his question.
All right.
Thank you.
So, Jamie, we're going to call for the question. I understand the council, the rest of the council's concerns, MBTA and other, the unemployment and a couple of things that you stated have nothing to do with what we're talking about this evening. I understand we're talking about financial issues, but if you can ask your question, please.
Sure, I have a couple of questions. One's to Brad Dorr. Brad, it's a beautiful, beautiful plan, and I know you've been in the planning stages for quite some time. Pertaining to the COVID-19, what kind of plans are built in to address the ventilation system being one, where we're fighting over space of children's desks at West Parish. What can be said pertaining to the HVAC system? Obviously, the talks that prior to the COVID-19, that buildings as green as they are and tight as they are for efficiencies is a problem presently. Ventilation is extremely important. So how can we address that issue with a new school?
So there's a couple of questions in there that I'm trying to unpack, which is, when we're talking about efficiency of buildings, building envelopes, tightness of schools, I think we're all striving in the design community to do that from an energy efficiency perspective. However, right, what we build into these schools, right, is the ventilation system to be able to accommodate, right, the amount of air exchange that you should be getting, in a new building, as well as having operable windows. So it's actually a fairly common question these days, for the projects that we have out there that are in the design stage, is what types of things can we do? There are other types of treatments, right, that can be added, in terms of UV, in terms of what they call bipolar ionization. But there's not a lot of data on the efficacy of that really today. So what most people are focusing on is to optimize the amount of air exchange that we can get into the building through the mechanical ventilation system, as well as potentially enhancing some of the MERV filtration, right, that we have going in and out of the classrooms and the other educational spaces. So this building, as I said earlier, is at the schematic design stage. And, based on, where we are currently with the COVID situation, we fully expected that to the extent the project goes forward, we would look at, some of those potential options that the district may want to consider. Some of these that, we're talking about right now really aren't significant in terms of cost upgrades. It's a different type of filter change out. You already have filters in there. You have a MERV 8. This will be moving up to a MERV 13. You have operable windows. We have optimized air exchange. So, whether or not at some point you deem that you want to consider some of these other types of UV or other options, that's something that we can consider during subsequent design phases.
Terrific. As far as desk spacing, there was a recent article in the Gloucester Daily Times on desk spacing at the West Parish School. Where would we sit presently on taking into consideration what the governor's requirements have been as far as desk spacing?
So I think, if we look at, my glass is half full on this at the moment. But if we were to go and look at what the construction schedule for this would be, that would put us out in 23, when we would actually be, looking to move into that building. I'm hopeful at that point that, there's some return to normalcy. But to the extent that wouldn't, I don't have a crystal ball either. I think we would be looking at a similar situation today. The classrooms are sized for, a certain number of students, depending upon how the district, determines it wants to operate, and the number of students that, and the capacity levels that you would have in there would dictate, how many students would be in a classroom and what that spacing would look like.
Thank you, Brad. Any more questions, Counselor?
Yes, I have a question. I think John Dunn would be. I know Melissa Cox, Councilor Cox asked a question regarding the transition of construction of the softball field, moving it to Green Street. Do we have an estimated cost associated with that? That's one question. These come down to costs. As far as the swing space at St. Anne's, is there a cost associated with renovating St. Anne's to get it to current building code requirements? Thank you.
Counselor, you kind of broke up in both of those questions, so I hope I answered them properly. So the relocation of the ball field, which reasonably looks like it will go somewhere on the Green Street property, that is going to be under the control and construction management of DPW. So, I can't really kind of opine at this point as to what that's going to be, what the layout's going to be, what it's going to look like, what the entrances are going to be, what the access is going to be. So that's going to be a decision that's going to have to be made by DPW in terms of how they manage, all of the other recreational fields within the city. As far as the swing space, again, we're not there yet. So we will have to put out an RFP, and we'll see what happens in terms of the responses for that swing space once we defined it and put that out, and see who responds as to both what they have for availability of space, what that space looks like, what the utility of that space is going to be, and ultimately what the cost of that space is going to be.
Thank you, John. Counselor O'Hara, any more questions?
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
All righty, any more Counselor questions? Nope, hold on one second, Val. Is there anybody on the council that hasn't spoken yet that has a question? All righty, Counselor Gilman.
I'm wondering if I should wait for the superintendent to speak before I ask the question that I wanted us to have ample time to discuss. So I'm just asking you procedurally.
I don't know what your question is, so I can't answer it.
Okay. So why don't I read it to you, and then we can decide when you want me to answer it. Because I don't, if the superintendent's going to discuss this as part of his presentation, we can wait. But my question was, and it's an important one, I believe, that if the debt exclusion override does not pass, what is the projected cost to make both elementary schools compliant to 21st century learning, including all necessary upgrades and utilities, adequate space for special ed and music, gym, cafeteria, technology, and parking? And how will we finance this? Will we again need to move forward with another debt exclusion override for these loans? In addition to the $1 million, what else will we stand to lose from an MSBA assistance? And how many years will it get, do you feel like it will get back in the queue for another round of MSBA approvals? Counselor, School Committee President Jonathan Pope mentioned that we had started this process in 2014, so 6 years to get here. If this was to happen, could MSBA funds be further drained 5 years from now due to state budget shortfalls? And what is the competition for cities and towns to be accepted for MSBA consideration? So those are my significant questions that I do think that we need to have a conversation about, because I think we all know that the ballot question is very short and sweet. And these are the meaningful questions that we need to know. And I think this would be a good time tonight to discuss them, in my opinion, if the committee agrees.
Jonathan?
Council, thank you for the questions. Most of those will be addressed in the next presentation.
Okay, perfect.
So I would suggest that you wait and see what gets addressed and what doesn't.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, thank you, Val. Are there any more councilor questions before we turn it back over to the school committee?
Okay.
All right, Jonathan, back to you.
Thank you very much. Just before Ben starts his presentation on the alternatives, we did have one little section in there in that last slide that Tom Ellis was going to address about the timing and sort of the sequence of things. It should just take a minute or two.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, I think the one main thing that that is in front of the council and the school committee is preparing for the vote, which is allowing us to move forward with this project starting right on November 3rd. I think we're teed up, ready to go, and we need every week between that time to finish the drawings and to get the project started so we can get it under construction as soon as school is over in the spring of 2021. And then that would allow us approximately 2 years to finish to start and complete the construction. So I think we are on a very tight time frame, and I think as we move forward, it's important for us to quickly be prepared to quickly move after the vote, presuming a successful vote in November, so that we can meet this September date. So it's extremely important. I think the major milestones that we've established here is working together with the design team to work on the off-site components, which is the swing space, to get the East Gloucester or the Veterans School prepared to move them and have that facility up and running so that we can start this. So I think it's a doable schedule. There's not a lot of cushion in the schedule. The CM firm is trying to be very aggressive, so we're going to be working very diligently to move forward quickly with the design or the construction, so that can happen. So I don't know if there's any other questions on the schedule component, but it's a very tight schedule, but very doable.
Thank you, Tom. I don't see any questions. So let's move on to the presentation on what happens if Gloucester doesn't vote for the debt exclusion for the Veterans East Gloucester School. And I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Lummis.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Council President LeBlanc. Thank you to the entire City Council for having me here tonight. I also want to thank, notice and recognize Amy Pasquarello, Principal Amy Pasquarello, who's on the call tonight, of course, Principal of the East Gloucester School. Just to announce to the community, we are ready to go tomorrow for opening school and bring kids back to school in a variety of new ways, but we're pretty excited about it. And I imagine there may be some restless students out there at home, maybe getting to sleep pretty soon, and I'm positive there are many restless teachers who've been working incredibly hard over the past couple months here. So tomorrow's a big day for us. So you've heard about quite a bit of the good news, to essentially creating, replacing 2 schools with 1 modern school, a new softball field, open space and recreation, passive recreation in East Gloucester, and the good news about, because the historically low rates, less impact than maybe we could have had in terms of the impact on taxpayers. It might be because I'm the new guy, but I get to tell you about the difficult news, the bad news. So And that is what happens if the vote doesn't succeed in November. There are two likely paths, and both of them are quite difficult. And I'm going to explain to you what those are. So, Brad, if you go to the next slide, please. So one path is restart from the beginning with MSBA, and I'll describe that in depth in terms of timeline, but then also impact on cost to the community. And then the second one is turning our backs on a new modern school that essentially, modernizes two schools in one. And then what we'd have to do instead is attempt to maintain the two substandard buildings at East Gloucester and Veterans. So I'll go into both these in a little more detail and also talk about the cost related to them. We can go to the next slide, Brad. So path one, restart from the beginning with MSBA. You'll see here on the top the language from MSBA's policy around what has to happen if the residents of Gloucester do not vote in favor of the override. And that means we would have to submit a new statement of interest and then await invitation from MSBA. That is essentially starting the process from scratch. We would, again, compete with 100 more proposals likely from other districts. We would, at the very earliest, perhaps come to that decision if we were fortunate enough to move forward and be selected in December 2021. But it really means going back all the way to February 2017 and redoing all the work that we've completed since, including paying additional dollars for it, for the studies, for design work, and essentially, the timeline doesn't begin until 2022. So the timeline that began in 2018 really reset to 2022. And we wouldn't be looking at completion of a new school until 2027 at the earliest. And as you can see in the red here, these are absolute best case scenarios. I mean, this is being optimistic upon optimistic. That's just timeline. Now go ahead, it's all right. Now then we have cost to that. At this point, just looking at some very simple escalation and being pretty conservative in this, the cost of the school at this point is $66.7 million, as you all saw. If we started construction in 2025, that's 5 years of delay, okay? And that's the best case scenario. It's likely that there actually would be more delay than that. I had a very conservative estimate of escalation at 5% a year, and we've been seeing, 7, 8, 10, even 12% of escalation per year in the past 4 or 5 years. That would be an increase of almost $20 million to the project. That's simply if we're restarting from scratch here with MSBA. And then people also raise the concern about, does MSBA's reimbursement become less, or does the MSBA competition become more fierce? And it likely would. So that's the first path, restart with MSBA. And then path two is attempt to maintain two failing buildings. I won't go into the detail here, which I presented to the school committee in July and to the public then, but essentially both buildings, as you know, have substandard facilities that continue to compromise student learning and services. They have inadequate systems, they have health, safety, and accessibility issues, and also inferior working conditions for our staff. You can go ahead. I won't go through all of these in depth because you know a lot of them. I'll highlight a few. And these are a long time in coming. I mean, these are very old buildings, 60, 70 years old. Especially lately, we've done quite a good job of keeping them operating and doing great upkeep of the DPW. But still, at some point, homes, buildings, especially the use of a school, they get tired out and they need to be replaced. So we have antiquated systems, including heating and the boiler. These schools don't have music or art rooms. Music takes place on a stage. Art is on a cart, meaning the teacher moves from room to room. Gym and the cafeteria are the same space, and that limits scheduling, that limits opportunities for students, physical activity, and is never done these days. It hasn't been done for years and years in schools in terms of building schools. The technology infrastructure is insufficient, especially these days as we are using much more technology than we ever have, and will likely continue in many ways with that technology. And then students who need extra support, some of our most vulnerable learners, special education students, English language learners, our youngest students, they're in substandard spaces that can't be replaced easily. You can go next slide, please. Inadequate systems I already talked about. The modulars are past their typical livelihood. The roof is leaking. We have the building isn't fully alarmed. Carpenter ants continue to be an issue in some places. This is just what happens when you have a building that's 70 years old and out of date and it's really exceeded its useful life. We have to keep on maintaining all of these until we can replace the building. Next slide, please. There are safety and accessibility issues at East Gloucester. The fire protection is inadequate, does not have an automatic sprinkler system, which of course is code these days. The auditorium is not ADA compliant. Getting into the building is also complicated, or getting into the modulars are difficult for folks in wheelchairs. The kitchen is small, leading to safety issues because of the overcrowding. And there aren't modern security measures in the school or East Gloucester as well. We can continue. And the staff working conditions. Teacher workroom is in the hallways. Staff lounge is too small for the size of the faculty. Only have one main bathroom for staff. That likely is not up to OSHA standards. Parking is inadequate, as folks know who live in the neighborhood or try to drop their kids off at school. There's nothing like the queuing space we'd have at a new school. And things get quite backed up there and quite difficult to maneuver around safely, especially with the kids coming and going on narrow sidewalks and the street. And there are support staff for literacy and math, and high needs students are sharing one small office. Really makes it very difficult working conditions for them. So let's look at veterans now. So in similar conditions, not quite as difficult because it's not quite as old, but crowded conditions cause instructional and language support to happen in the hallways. So these are folks who really need support on reading and language. Instead of having a small area or smaller room where they can learn in private with their teachers, they're learning in hallways. That's what their classroom is. Again, lunch and PE share the same space. Food coolers, storage, cleaning equipment are actually kept in the gym, diminishing the area that's available to students. There are no art rooms, as I talked about. And then insufficient storage for key equipment like nurse and health supplies, especially these days when health supplies are actually more than we've ever needed. We can continue. Great. Again, same challenge with the Univent heating system. Being old, Univent parts, we are continuing to try to replace them, repair them, improve them, but they are difficult to get and typically have to be built from scratch or built from, rebuilt when necessary. There's deterioration in the skin or the siding of the building. And the flooring is also, as you saw in some pictures, old, outdated, and in poor shape. The modulars as well are past their life expectancy. And we continue to have heating issues, insufficient parking, and the like. We can go next. Again, the building is not adequately alarmed in areas. There's asbestos because these floor tiles and other areas were made with that. As long as they stay intact, they're safe, but if they break down, then they can be dangerous to the occupants of the building. Sometimes the main entrance doors, depending on the weather, aren't closing properly, and we have the same concern about security issues. We've obviously updated and upgraded the need for security in all of our public buildings, including schools, and that isn't the case at veterans. Little accessible access to playground. So accessibility issues are pretty significant here. Pedestrian access, handicap parking spaces are limited, and then also multiple building entries and bathrooms fail to meet ADA and Massachusetts Building Code. Go to the next slide. So what happens here in terms of how do we address those ongoing and existing challenges if the community isn't able to support or doesn't choose to support a new modern school building? We really have two options here: capital improvements to the major systems, which I'll talk about, and talk about the cost of that. I want to just point out that if we just focus on capital improvements to the major systems, there still are no space or program improvements. The buildings remain too small, remain out of date, and remain unable to provide the educational program our students and families expect and our community expects. And then the other option would be renovations, make renovations as well to the improvement of major systems, but no additions. And I'll describe those both in a little more detail, and then also provide what we anticipate some conservative estimates on cost as well. Go next slide, please. So in terms of just give you a little background for folks. on renovations of existing buildings. The challenge with renovating them is if the renovation is extensive enough, or actually even if it's just beyond 30% of the renovations is 30% of the square footage or the cost, you're triggering quite a number of different code compliances, which then increase the costs to that renovation and extend that renovation even further, making it more expensive. So if the renovations or additions, that cost 30% of assessed value, they trigger full accessibility and ADA compliance across the whole entire building. Even if you're just renovating a small portion of the building, if that portion costs 30% of the assessed value, you've got to come into compliance with ADA across the entire facility, building and grounds. If, for example, you try to make renovations or additions that cost 50% of the assessed value, they also trigger additional codes such as seismic bracing compliance, which is not necessarily something you'd think you would need in Gloucester, but we would be required to do that. So we'd have to bring HVAC, electrical, fire alarm protection, all those up to code, and then could potentially, depending on the need for renovations, trigger these additional code compliances as well. So if we attempt to maintain these two school buildings, just by making major systems, okay, just improving major systems. So we're going to make sure that heating, ventilation, fire, plumbing, electrical are up to code and operating fully. Okay, we would just do that. We would not have any improvements in physical space. There would be no improvements in special education, or occupational therapy, or physical therapy, or support to English learners. There would be no art rooms or music rooms. The gym and cafeteria would still remain the same exact room as they are. Essentially, we'd see very few changes, visible changes, because all the changes would be in the systems, behind the scenes, behind the walls. Okay. The funding risk on this is that subject to approval via CIP budget and other city needs. The projected cost for just these major systems is $18 million per school. So that'd be a total of $36 million over the next 10 years. No reimbursement from MSBA. And that's comparing $36 million, still inferior in small buildings that are substandard in terms of our learning program. $36 million as compared to 66 for a brand new school that updates every single thing and gets us some other community benefits.
Ben, I hate to interrupt you, but I just want to throw this out there for the people watching. Just for that point you mentioned about 30 to 50%, East Gloucester is valued at about $3.5 million and Betts is valued at $4 million. So once you cross about $1.5 million on either, you're into those code things. And once you cross $2 million on either, you're seismic compliance.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Mr. Favazza. As anyone knows, in terms of construction, hitting those two numbers on a public building like this, you get there pretty quickly. So we go to the next slide.
I think one other thing, Ben, when you say $36 million is compared to 66, right? That 36 million, as you pointed out, has no MSBA reimbursement. The 66 actually would be reimbursed, right, in a new, so it would really be a 36 to 45 comparison.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Brad. Really appreciate that. You're exactly right. So that's a more apt comparison, $36 million to 45. And at this point, we would have the same schools for all the deficiencies. We just would have better systems within the schools. Great. Thanks a lot. So then going on, if we have renovations with no additions, so meaning we're renovating and upgrading the interior spaces, okay, and the building systems, okay, it would expand learning spaces for special education. It would create meeting space. It would create dedicated art and music space, okay? So I have some improvements, limited improvements, okay? It still would not touch the gym and cafeteria. It still would not improve the modular classrooms, which will need to be replaced within the next 10 years, certainly, okay? The classrooms remain undersized, okay? That's a timeline of about 10 years, 4 to 5 years per school to do each project, okay? But at this point, we're talking about $31 million per school, an estimate from right now. It's $60 million before escalation. So as we go 10 years out, we expect those costs to increase. These are estimates made by, I think, Dorn Whittier earlier a couple of years ago. So it would be a $60 million cost for minimal space and program improvements. That's before escalation. And again, no reimbursement from MSBA. At this point, we have the same two buildings, same age, minimal program improvements, upgraded building systems, still needing to be replaced at some point because they can't last forever. But have asked our taxpayers to fund $60 million worth of improvements with no reimbursement from MSBA. So we're getting quite expensive for limited improvements at this point, and well beyond what it would cost to replace both schools completely with a new school. We can continue.
And to add then, the work would have to be done while school's not in session.
Right, you could use swing. You might have to use swing space. So St. Anne's, perhaps, if it's available twice, and those are additional costs, as we know. No, I just want to be clear to folks: is there quite a number of costs? We don't include in here. These are good estimates based on the work that's been done, analyzing the schools and their current status. But they're also rough estimates, and they're conservative, meaning it's likely that they'd be more than this. But we do want to give you and the community a sense of the risk for not going forward. There is significant financial risk to the community, to the quality of the schools, the quality of learning, and really our commitment to our families by not going forward. And especially when you look at the very low cost of borrowing these days, you have the risk of being penny wise and pound foolish, so to speak. I think at this point, we're done with the slides, and happy to answer questions or make sure we can make it clearer in any way possible.
Alrighty, Jonathan, you want me to take this over first?
Yes, please.
All right. Do we have any councilor questions for the superintendent?
Yes, Mr. President, I have a question.
Councilor Holmgren.
So thank you very much, Ben. That was a very clear presentation, and I just want to make sure that I am completely understanding this. So right now, if we go forward with this vote, this funding is earmarked specifically for the schools. But if the community votes down the merger of the two schools, according to what you wrote on page 35 of your presentation, what could end up happening is exactly what people have been saying is happening with city buildings and has been for years, i.e. that we could technically use whatever money we've got in our budget and appropriate it for maintenance and improvement of the schools. But if something else happened, then we would have to take that money away, and these schools would continue to suffer from benign neglect. Is that correct?
You do go from certainty, because if the community does support the debt exclusion override, you go from certainty of funding, that's true, to uncertainty, as you were describing. And then you do have to then, as any community does, have to make choices about how to spend that money, or borrow additional money. And John can talk more about that, but you are right that at that point, you don't have a dedicated, identified source of funding specifically for rebuilding the school or renovating it or repairing it or fixing the systems.
Thank you.
All righty, thank you, Jen. Any other councilors with any questions? Councilor Memhard.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, everybody. This has been very, very helpful and good questions, too. I just want to clarify, if I understand putting these numbers together in the big picture, for a $67 million project, of which we'd be bound as a city for 45, to go with a new project, a new school, that compares with the numbers that Ben just laid out for the existing space being updated and renovated with no improvements to them of $60 million, round numbers. Is that correct?
Yes, and like you said, yeah, that's absolutely correct. It is round numbers, and we could probably count a further escalation of that $60 million as well. So, yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Any other councilor questions? Councilor Gilman?
Thank you, Counselor. So my question goes back to John Dunn. Sorry, John, I know it's been a long day for you, but my question to you is, if this was to fail on November 3rd, and we had to take the second route, we would have no other choice than to request a debt exclusion override once again for almost the similar numbers to what the voters just voted against, correct? So we would just, if not even higher, because we wouldn't be getting the extra amenities that we had hoped so much to have. So is that correct, John? Was that would be our only alternative? We can't finance this type of work through any other way through a debt exclusion override.
Yes, basically that's what we would have to do. I think kind of a similar question came up before, and that would be, how would we do this without an override? Do any of this? Do anything? And the simple answer is you could always do it, but you would have to make decisions as to how you're going to balance the budget after taking on that debt. So, if you take on $1.3 million in debt and you don't have that available capacity, then what are you not going to do? So, is it going to be on the school side, the city side? Is it going to be police, fire? What are you not going to do in order to come up with that $1.3 million when the budget would not otherwise be able to handle it?
And I do have a second question, if that's okay, Councilor LeBlanc.
Yep, go ahead, Councilor.
So my question is, how can we kind of share the data that we've come up with to come up with the numbers of what it takes to replace the schools? Because I think what I will hear from people is that they think everything is really high, and we have to always think of prevailing wages, and and this is going to be done when it's even more expensive than it is today. So how can we get that estimate to make it more communicated, I guess? Because the worst thing that we can do is have people saying that we don't really believe those numbers, because I remember that we've gone through that before, and I think it's important that we have credibility in the estimates with some substance, and I don't know how that would be done, maybe in B&F for the school committee or something like that, but it's just something that I think would be really helpful.
Councilor, just a general comment. I mean, much of what Ben just talked about were options that the school building committee considered over many meetings as to how we were going to approach this project. And we started to, as Jonathan Pope said, we started talking about this in 2014. We started talking about aspects of various considerations, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think we had 14 options on the school building committee, and doing renovations to the 2 existing schools, putting minor renovations there, doing something in more of a major category, were all considered and rejected as being, we're still going to end up with 2 small substandard schools, and at that point, why try and do that? They were old, they were substandard. Everybody kind of admitted that, and we were working with kind of the same estimates of the various 14 considerations at that point in time. So, I mean, you can go back and take those initial estimates for some of these renovations and kind of bring them forward at 4.5% and 5% a year in terms of construction inflation, and come up with it. But the fact was they were rejected as a legitimate approach for the city to take.
Councilor LeBlanc, if I may piggyback on John's comments.
Yes.
Councilor Yeoman, I understand why you're asking for that, but I would not subject my budget and finance committee to redoing everything that the building committee has already done. They've already gone through those numbers. People choose to listen or they choose not to listen to those numbers. There is mistrust in government, and I completely understand why, but we're not going to redo what the building committee has already done. They've decided, they went through the numbers, they looked at every scenario, and I completely support them on their decision for picking one of them. And I don't think it's anything that budget and finance can do to rehash what they've done in a different manner without coming to the same outcome.
Counselor, I wasn't talking about City Council BNF. I was talking about School Committee BNF, who has already gone through this in partnership with the Building Committee. So if I wasn't clear, I'm sorry. But
yes, you were not clear. And I mean,
okay, thank you.
They've already done it as well.
All right, thank you. That was our BNF Chair, Councilor Cox. Councilor Gelman, is there any more questions? All righty, thank you, Val. Councilor Memhard.
Just one follow-up clarification. It would be helpful, Jonathan, if either you or Mr. Lewis would speak a little bit more to the student population, the demographics that our community is looking at. We're looking at 2 schools currently at the elementary level with a 230, 240 student population consolidated to one at 440. But I know there's concern in the community about clarity about what the projected demographics and student population with the catchment areas that are being served by this new proposed school, especially with new construction going on in Gloucester. It would be helpful if you could just restate some of that perspective, please.
Okay, I can, talk to that a little bit. The catchment area for East Gloucester actually extends very close to Veterans School. The catchment area for veterans runs over sort of to Burnham's Field and up onto Trask Street and in there. So one of the things that we looked at when we made the decision to go with the site and was that we plotted the homes of every student in both of the catchment areas. And then we looked at where they were closer to. And essentially, there are more kids that live closer to the veterans site than to the East Gloucester site by a substantial amount. And that's partially because back when we closed Fuller, there weren't enough kids in East Gloucester to fill that school. So we had to jump over the veterans catchment area and take kids from around the Burnham's Field area. And some of those families are still there. So the population that we would be servicing is, well, veterans has the highest needs population of any of our schools. And high needs being English language learners, low income, and kids on IEPs. And East Gloucester, but East Gloucester is not that far off as well. So they're similar populations. And we're going to get the map. There it is. So if you look at that map, what you're looking at is the blue dots are East Gloucester students, and the I guess it's orangish red dots are veteran students, and that's where they live. And that's where the schools are located. And if you make a line halfway between, that's the information. You've got 74 households live closer to vets, and then 48 households live closer to East Gloucester. Well, thank you. That's in one of our previous presentations. So I don't know if I answered your question, Scott. Was there something else that you were trying to get at?
Well, the second part was just what I know you have to go through this for the MSBA, but what the projected student population we're looking at, that you are planning to provide for in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Are the numbers stable? Are they shrinking? Are they growing? I know that at the high school, the numbers have been declining overall, although obviously our costs of service have increased for a variety of reasons. But in terms of the elementary school population that we're serving, if you could provide some sense of where that's headed in the years ahead right now as we understand things, especially given new construction and new homes that are occurring into the Gloucester community.
Yeah. When MSBA approves you to go into feasibility, they make you do, they do, you just provide the information. They do their own estimates of what the population of the schools will be. And the information they provided during feasibility was that although there is a decline in the high school, and that could be partially because of students going off to the tech or private schools. But there is a relatively stable population in the elementary schools. I think the projection over the next 10 years was it fluctuated, but there was overall just a very slight decline projection. Now, that being said, we always have to understand that we have 275 kids, Gloucester kids that go to Rockport. And what we saw in West Parish when we built the new school is kids that were choicing out to Manchester or Hamilton and Wenham or even Rockport return to our district. And I'd expect the same influx. It wasn't huge, but it was significant.
All right, Counselor, does that answer your question? Scott, all set?
Other than the fact that Jonathan opened up one other thorny question, and that is the discussion about consolidating our elementary program with our neighboring Rockport.
We are still in conversation with them, although it has taken a back seat over the last 6 months because of other situations.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Scott. Any other counselor questions at the moment? All righty, seeing none, I'll hand it back over to Jonathan.
Jamie O'Hara had his name up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't know if you saw it. I don't know if it's still up, but it was up.
I did not. I don't see it. Jamie, okay, there you go, Jamie. I see you. Go ahead, Counselor O'Hara.
Just want to clarify something with the superintendent. The city of Salem,
Jamie.
neighbors to the south,
Jamie.
towns, they have a rather aggressive renovation program to their schools. You had said the MSBA does not reimburse on renovation programs. That's to Superintendent Loomis, please.
Sure. So they do have I forget, Brad, you may help me with the name of the program, but they do have a program where you can get some reimbursement for
green repair. It's called the green repair repair program, I believe.
Yeah,
Accelerated repair program. Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct. It was the green repair. It's now called the accelerated repair program. And it basically deals with boilers, just boilers specific, not distribution systems, and roofs and windows. So that's kind of a specific program, right, that communities can look at for those specific items. And then the core program, which is what you're considering now, it does consider renovation programs, right, and reimbursement for renovation options, which was part of the options that we considered when we went through the various phases, as I outlined early on in the process. So we actually looked at renovation, renovation addition, and new construction in a number of different forms for both schools. The renovation only wasn't an option at Vets because Vets was going to have to be a consolidated school. And therefore you couldn't, because of the number of students, you couldn't just renovate that school and bring all the students to it. But we looked at all renovation and renovation addition options as well. And, you know, as the superintendent was pointing out, the actual, you know, most cost-effective option was to look at new construction, primarily associated with the time it takes to do renovation. And, you know, renovation is just, it's harder work. And many times we find that renovation, and Tom can speak to this as well, is not as cost-effective as being able to do a new construction option, particularly when you have a swing space opportunity and you can get in, you can get out.
So
So, Councilor O'Hara, Jamie, can you hear me? You're very, very soft spoken. I could barely hear you. I don't know if it's just me, but I can just barely hear what you're saying.
better?
Nope.
I apologize.
All right, that's okay. Do you have another question? Oh, sorry about that. Are you all set, Counselor?
I have a question. Did we have definitive numbers on renovating both veterans and East Gloucester? You know, bottom line renovation cost. Did we come to that?
Yes, sir. Yeah, we looked at all of those and we had an independent estimator go and review those costs.
Okay, terrific. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Any other councilor questions? Alrighty, seeing none. Jonathan, back to you.
Okay, we have one committee member, Samantha Watson. You have a question?
Thank you, Jonathan. Ben, Jonathan, and Steve, would you mind if I asked Amy Pasquarello to comment on a question?
I don't have an objection.
I have no objection. We'll have to, she's in the audience. We'll have to promote her. Let's see. Can I do that, Maria, or do I?
He's just promoted, I think.
Maria beat you to.
I just did.
Okay, Amy.
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry to put you on the spot, but I just was hoping, I mean, I don't think there's anyone better than you than to comment on this.
I like how you're starting.
So obviously teaching and learning has changed quite a bit since the 40s. So would you mind commenting on what some of the learning limitations are in your school? So in other words, you know, in the 40s, schools were designed in a certain way, and now they're being designed to meet 21st century educational programs. What are some of the limitations that you see at East Gloucester to learning specifically?
So in the educational profile that we submitted to the state, there's pages of it. So I'll try to summarize. Number one is space. To have space to do breakout rooms and interventions and to address the needs of students is a huge challenge. Today, I had multiple emails about trying to find testing space for physical therapy testing this year. It will be done in the hallway because my gym is now my staff lounge after hours, and it is every inch is used. My OT space is shared with an EL space, so that's occupational therapy and English language learners, both of which you have to walk through a kindergarten classroom to get to. So space is number one, the biggest challenge, to find appropriate space to give the educational program that the students need and deserve. Other challenges are rooms to collaborate. This new building, if you take a look, the breakout rooms for in between classrooms is tremendous for, you know, whether we have co-teaching or we have just support from special education. The ability to mix groups and address students at their needs is tremendous. the extended learning areas so that they can do hands-on projects. And, you know, we have none of that. Our extended learning area is outside. That's about the extent of it at East Gloucester. The level of education restricted by this space is the largest challenge that we have. Not to mention the internet wires, the alarms that go off for that daily because the systems are too old, and the heating that's on, you know, that affects education too. But space is the largest that directs the educational program, you know, most directly.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions from school committee members? Okay, Laura.
Thank you, Jonathan. Listening to Principal Pasquarello tonight, of all nights, right? The night before schools open.
There's nothing else in my mind.
Well, right, of course. I just wanted to say, there's been a Herculean task to start school tomorrow by our teachers, by our administrators, by our principals. And we've done that because the feedback we've gotten from the community and what the educators are telling us is that kids need, if we can make it safe, they need to be in school, and that we are doing everything possible to get them there tonight. You know, it feels really, really apropos. And so as we talk about this new school and we listen to what the principal's telling us, it just feels even more urgent to me to sort of listen to these needs and to understand school matters, right? The way our kids learn in a building matters. And it feels to me like we have this, really feels like we're in under the wire of, in this moment, right? This very tentative moment of economic change and social change to get this beautiful school built that will really serve needs for our community. So I just, I wanted to thank you, Amy, and, the administration and the teachers, and just sort of it just puts such a fine point on what we're talking about here tonight. The need for our schools to be, to be safe and productive and more than adequate places for our kids to learn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Are there any other questions? Joel, you have a question.
Yeah, I just want to put this out there and kind of confirm what I think I know is the answer. So again, for those who are watching tonight or those who will watch us in the future, and certainly for those in the city council, I as a school committee member and I as a citizen didn't necessarily agree with or was happy with the path that we've taken over the last 12 years that got us to where we are. But that said, short of someone inventing a time machine and showing us 15 years ago what the future holds, I can't think of another option that's before us that is more productive than the one that's laid out for the E.G. Vets consolidation. And so, I kind of put it out there to anyone who's participating in this meeting right now, again, short of a time machine and changing the past, at this juncture where we are with the choices before us, I don't know that anyone here who can articulate a more effective path forward. And if that is the case in which no one can articulate such a path forward, then I think at worst case scenario, you end up like me, which is you might not like how we got here, but you recognize we're here and we got to make the best of it going forward. And so I kind of put it out there to my fellow committee members, my fellow counselors, if you get something better, I'd love to hear it, but I don't think we have anything better. I think this is the best choice we have where we are now.
Thank you, Joel. Kathy?
Amy, I wanted, being on the building committee, one of the things built into the plan is are the partitions in between the rooms. And I think people have asked about kind of the design element and the current situation we're in. Can you talk about something like that and how beneficial that might be in general? Forget the time we're living in.
So I have never used a measuring tape, or I'm using a yardstick as much as I am. I'm measuring all seats, all desks. Are they 3? Are they 6? Are they whatever feet apart? to be able to open up a room and have additional space to spread students out, that would be tremendous. The extended learning areas in the new building, I would be using those right away. The added space and the flexibility of the space is key. A year ago, when we were, really getting into the design of this building, who knew we would be at this place where we have to be 6 feet apart or wear masks or 3 feet apart or whatever it is. But that building is flexible. Those walls can literally move, and we can create a space that is safe for our children in, I can't say anything that comes towards us because I wouldn't think that this came towards us 6 months ago. But the flexibility of that building is tremendous. And boy, I wish I was in it right now. And Laura, to what you said about being in the weeds and everything, I have to say, the other day I was walking through the halls and my head was swimming with they're doing the air quality test and I don't have enough space in this room and I got to move a desk and I got to get something else and I've got to answer 20,000 emails and phone calls. And I took a moment and looked up, and the bulletin boards were beautiful. The teachers had a plan. I had a first grade teacher going around videotaping. I don't know if anybody saw our Meet EGS staff video. It's tremendous. To pat myself on the back, but my first grade teacher did it. But to see that all of it is happening, even though I am in the weeds, and our teachers are amazing. And I hate when I hear that I have the worst building in the city, because I think I have the best school in the city. I do have the worst building. So I'm asking that we have the support to give the teachers what they need, to give our students what they need. And that building, the flexibility is everything they need. That was an unprepared answer. I hope it was okay.
Samantha, you have another question. Yeah.
I always, when I see Ben's presentation, I try to just remind people that we don't just have 2 substandard elementary school buildings, we have 4. And I think that's important to remember because, Beeman and Plum Cove don't sort of exist in a vacuum. Their needs are almost as significant as the other ones. So I think it's important to remember that although we're only talking about, if this vote fails, what we would do or what would need to be done to East Gloucester vets, that's not to say that something major happens at Beeman or something major happens at Plum Cove. And so, we have a lot of work to do in our school buildings. So I don't know if, Ben, maybe you can just speak to, if this vote did fail, what is it, would the next step guarantee, would we move right on to East Gloucester, or would it just be on a needs basis? Does that make sense?
Yes.
You're muted.
You are absolutely right that the 4 small elementary schools are all a challenge in terms of facility. They're all old, okay? They're all, have had a lot of use. So no, we focus on the presentation, just really focus on East Gloucester and veterans because that's the sort of matter at hand. And didn't want to complicate it further with talking about the other 2. But, whether it's the modulars, whether it's the, the siding, whether it's the, the small learning spaces, whether it's the, roofs perhaps, or the other systems in the school, they all have to really go on a very clear timeline of how do we maintain them before we can replace them. And I mean, the one of the real possible bright lights here is that Gloucester is, looking at the second phase of a longer term plan, a longer term approach to replace its, school buildings on a time frame, and that's what every community does. Fall River has done that. Malden has done that. Beverly has done that. That's just good. That's good municipal capital planning, and that's what we're in the middle of. And we can keep on going on that path, and then we'll have to also address Plum Cove and Beeman. There's no 2 ways about it. But if we start now, or continue rather, with East Gloucester and veterans and solve those, then we can turn our attention at the proper time to Beeman and Plum Cove, and then do them, in the future, as John was talking earlier. But it's good. It's a good approach for a municipality to do, because at some point these buildings do have to need to be replaced. I think it's hard to argue against that.
Thank you. Melissa, you have a question?
I do, and it's a procedural question mostly. I can't remember, when is the vote where the city council considers transferring the land? Is it before the November vote or after?
2 weeks from tonight.
Yeah, it's gonna
Okay.
be before, yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to be sure, because doing hands in a lot of things right now, I can't keep everything straight. But I guess my question is, that's a very important vote. And we know that there's still questions out there, either through the council or through council's friends or people that we communicate with in our bubbles. So I guess my question is, I mean, we don't have many joint city council school committee meetings. Are there any outstanding matters or questions or issues that need to be addressed by any city council member before that vote goes forward? So that's a really important vote to be taken in 2 weeks. And I just want to make sure that all lines of communication are open and easy access to any concerns that may come up in the meantime. I mean, because I think we've made a case pretty clear of what happens if we don't get the vote. But if we don't get the city council vote, that's just as important. So I just want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable and understands consequences and expectations and understands how teaching and learning works in a building. You know, that there's so much, this is a loaded question. So I just want to make sure that the council has access, or if they have any questions, now would be a good time to bring it up, or at least figure out a way how we can communicate with each other to make sure we all feel comfortable in making the decision that has to come next.
So Melissa, before we have any questions asked, this is before planning and development tomorrow evening. So I think we'll be overstepping our bounds, asking some questions this evening without it being vetted at the P&D level first. So, but I appreciate the offer. I think the council of questions will come tomorrow evening before our council vote in 2 weeks.
And you are going to have a public hearing on that vote? Is that correct, Steve?
Yes, sir. It'll be on the 29th.
Okay.
And what night are you taking the actual vote?
That will be on the public hearing will be on Tuesday, the 29th.
Oh, so public hearing and then do the vote right after the public hearing?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
But it'll be at planning and development tomorrow evening to be vetted through the council.
Thank you. Laura, you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. I just wanted to sort of just clarify one thing with John Dunn, which is based on the superintendent's presentation, based on everything we've said here tonight, you know, there's a cost to maintaining our school buildings. So there is a cost to the debt override that we will vote on November 3rd, and we know what those costs are. And my understanding is, you said, you know, we will obviously have to keep our schools operational if that does not pass. And so, Mr. Dunn, I just wanted to be sure I understood. So either to support the fixing and maintaining and the renovating in whatever level of those buildings that exist, we would either need to, one, do another debt exclusion override vote, or two, the money would come out of the city's budget, or would have to come out of a budget that already exists within the city, and we would have to pull back on something else. Am I correct in that?
Yes. So again, you have the city budget has, from the general fund point of view, is, let's call it $105 million. If all of a sudden we have to find another $1.5 million on top of that, for example, in this year, we already established a budget. So if we have to find another $1.5 million, how are we going to do that? So we either do it with an override, or we do it by decreasing some other part of the budget. So that really becomes, we have a fixed amount of money that we can budget for each year for the most part. As I kind of talked about a little bit at the very beginning, you know, the tax levy goes up by 2.5% a year plus new growth. And then there's some things outside of that, but we are basically restricted by, our restrictions on the tax levy growth to 3% in growth a year. And if we go outside of that, then we have a problem. We have other things that our pension liability, for example, goes up by 6.8% a year, and that's on $10 million. What happens if we've been very lucky in our, being in the GIC, that we've been able to hold down costs of health insurance, and those have been reasonable, very reasonable, somewhere in the range of 2.5% to 3% a year. What happens if that goes to 8? So yeah, there's all sorts of dangers out there, and we're constricted by budget. So if we go outside of certain things, then we'll have to go back, or you will have to go back to the taxpayers, to the residents, and ask for an override, or find a way to cut the budget, the operating budget that you currently have.
Thank you. So I just want to clarify. So voting no on this project does not mean we don't pay for it, right? We pay for it somewhere. And I guess that's what I'm trying to get at, because that's something that I hear, is that we can't do this because we can't afford to do this. We don't have the money. And I understand, like, finances are very tight. But somewhere, at some point, our kids still have to go to school. So the money will come, whether it comes from this or from restricting other services. We will have to pay for it somewhere. Just wanted to clarify that.
Well, I guess, so that's kind of a difficult question. So if the vote is no, then in my opinion, and it is just my opinion, the project is dead. So, the MSBA took a vote on August 25th, and they're looking for the city to commit to funding of that project within 120 days. If this vote on November 3rd is no, then I don't see any way for the city to figure out how to fund it otherwise within the remaining time until essentially Christmas.
Right. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I was unclear. I meant that if the city votes no and the MSBA project is dead, we still have our children in these buildings.
Sure.
So,
yep.
Right. So we still are going to have to pay, the community will still somehow, some way need to pay to maintain these buildings and to improve them.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Before I send it back to Council President LeBlanc, you have a couple of councilors asking questions. I would just like to say to Councilor Pett, he asked a question that I think was answered pretty much, but I would like to say that the last couple of meetings of the building committee before the schematic design was submitted, voted to be submitted, we spent a great deal of time on cost engineering, and we made a number of value saving cuts to facade, and I think we had lintels over all the windows and we removed those. There were a number of things that were voted on by the committee. It was thoroughly vetted as far as every possible thing that we thought we could do that would bring the cost down that might be considered just frivolous. Okay.
We changed some materials to save money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Jonathan. It's an important fact, and if you even go back, way back, Gloucester High School was built in 1939, and it was in architectural magazines around the country for, again, functionality and, meeting those needs without extra costs. And I just think it's an important thing, even more so today. And I want to thank all of you for that and having made whatever those cuts are. Like I said, looking at the current design, it does not look like anything is quote unquote frivolous or whatever from what I could see at this point. Thank you.
I'm glad you can remember back to 1939, Barry. All righty.
Thank you, Council President.
So I'm going to hand it back to you, Council President LeBlanc.
Thank you, Jonathan. Melissa, and then Councilor Cox, and then Councilor Holmgren have questions. Councilor Cox?
I don't really have a question. I just want to add to the last conversation when we were talking about costs. In order to do an override, we need to piggyback with another election. And after this November one, I'm not sure what the next date is, but the cost to do an individual election in order to vote on a single item, such as an override, is anywhere from $30,000 to $40,000 for the city. So you can add that cost onto something if this doesn't pass and we need to do an override in a standalone election.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Holmgren?
Yes, thank you very much. This is a question for Amy Pasquarello. I am wondering what the impact of confidentiality is on the children who have physical therapy in the hallways and occupational therapy or English language learning, having to walk through a kindergarten classroom. I mean, you know, it's like they're in a fishbowl. How do teachers and ancillary staff control that?
It is a real concern. It's something we limit as much as possible. So I have a lot of RTI or intervention groups that are not necessarily special education students. I prioritize if somebody has to go in the hall, it's those students. But we try to, you know, confidentiality is something I stress strongly in the entire building. My staff knows that, you know, that this is what kids get what they need. We also have a culture at East Gloucester of students get what they need. And if they need to have a small breakout room or a short discussion group about a book, somebody else is going to be having a different service. We have a lot of interventions, whether it be special education or regular education or enrichment, where we have many people coming in and out of classrooms to support students. So we try to make it as normal as possible, but it is a real concern. And it's another reason that we need more space.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Any more Councilor questions? All righty. I don't want to cut anybody short the rest of this evening. I know that, you know, we've been in this for a few hours now. The school committee has had unlimited hours of Zooming over the past several days. Like I said, I'm not trying to cut anybody short here, but if we want to try to wrap this up shortly without any other discussion or any other counselors' questions or school committee questions, I have no objections to that, but I'll hand it over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you. As far as I see no more questions, I would just like to thank everybody for this opportunity to present this. I hope that people in the community have been paying attention. There's a lot of information that, you know, it is hard to disseminate because hopefully I see the Times is here tonight. We'll be doing our best to put this information on our website, all the information. We will put the presentation tonight up on our website if parts of it are already there. But sometimes it's difficult to wade through all of these reports to get to find out the thing that you want an answer to. So we do have a question and answer section on the website. So if you want an answer to a question specifically, please just submit it. There's a way to do that. We're trying our best to answer all the questions and get all the accurate information out there for everybody. so they can make informed decision when it comes to the vote in November. So that being said, thank you very much. Steve, do you have anything else
Yeah.
to say?
Same, echo your statements. I'd like to thank the school committee, the subcommittees that are a part of the school committee for your tireless hours. The negotiations you guys have been going through, the mayor, our superintendent, Lummis, our former superintendent, Richard Sapphire. He's been on here the whole time. Thank you, Richard, for stepping up in the beginning to get this ball rolling for us so we can be here this evening. Bill, Brad, Tom, thank you everybody for being here. I know you guys have been through the ringer the past few weeks, and we've got a tall task before us the next few weeks, and hopefully we can steer through this and, you know, see some improvements over the next few weeks and get to stay in school. With that being said, if there's nothing else, I will call for a motion to adjourn the city council.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. I'm going to call for the roll call. Councilor Gilman,
Yes.
Councilor Holmgren,
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Councilor Cox,
Yes, thank you all.
Councilor LeBlanc, yes. Councilor McCarthy,
Thank you, yes.
Councilor Memhard,
Yes, good night.
Councilor O'Hara. You with us, Jamie?
Yes, and thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Jamie. And Councilor Nolan.
Yes, and thank you, everybody. Great night.
All right, the city council is adjourned. Chairman Pope. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Pat.
Oh, my gosh, I'm still stuck in 1939.
Sorry, buddy.
Thank you to all of everyone on the school side for all of your work, not just in the last couple of months, over the last number of years working on this project. Yes.
Thank you. A motion to adjourn passes on a roll call vote of 9 in favor, 0 opposed. Chairman Pope.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you again for hosting this meeting, and we will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Maria, can we have a roll call vote?
Ms. Watson,
Yes.
Ms. Weason,
Yes.
Kathy Clancy,
Yes, thank you, everybody on the council for being part of this.
Mr. Favazza,
Yes.
Chairman Pope,
Yes.
Ms. Prince,
Thank you all. Teamwork will get this done, no matter what the outcome is. Yes.
and Mayor Taken.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And to the students tomorrow and the teachers and the principals, good luck, and good luck on the first day of school, everyone. Thank you for all your work and consideration and getting us to the first day of school, everyone, including the school committee. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Night. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Everyone.
Thank you.
The motion passes unanimously, and the school committee is adjourned. And thank you all.